I am honored to be moderating this panel session, one filled with powerful women leaders from my homeland. As a father of 3 young girls, women leaders like these set the standard for my daughters to aspire to. As has been done in the panels preceding this, I want to respectfully acknowledge the Hawaiian people, the Kanaka Maoli, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and to pay respect to the kupuna, both past and present. Without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished panel in the order in which they will be addressing us this afternoon. We'll first hear from Ms. Suliana Taukei. Ms. Taukei is the Principal Legal Officer at the Office of the Attorney General in Fiji, and currently the vocal point for human rights on behalf of the Fiji government. She has worked extensively in the area of human rights, contributing to the ratification of Core 9 human rights conventions, including the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, International Conventions on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Ms. Taukei was instrumental in the drafting of Fiji's state report for the 3rd cycle of the Universal Period Review, and was part of the Fiji delegation to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in 2019. Following Ms. Taukei's remarks, we'll next then hear from Dr. Natasha Khan, Ph.D. Dr. Khan is a lecturer and coordinator for the University of the South Pacific's Leadership, Governance, and Human Rights program. Dr. Khan attained her master's in social policy at Swansea University in the UK as a Commonwealth scholar, and her PhD in politics and law from the University of York, also in the UK, as a Gowron scholar. Natasha is passionate about empowering women and children and works closely with schools and faith groups on these issues. She was appointed chair for Pacific Human Rights Defenders Network in early 2022, and is also a member of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crimes. Following her remarks, we'll then hear from Ms. Lewaravu Loukinikini. Ms. Loukinikini Lewaravu, my apologies. Ms. Lewaravu is the Director of the Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission of the Republic of Fiji. Prior to this role in Fiji, she was the Director of the National Human Rights Institution, Office of the Ombudsman in Samoa, from February 2016 to September 2023. Loukinikini has legal expertise, extends to his tenure as State Solicitor at the Government of Samoa's Office of the Attorney General from November 2007 to November 2014, focusing on civil litigation, legal opinions, commercial and international law. She was admitted as a lawyer to the Samoan Supreme Court in 2008 and is an active member of the Samoa Law Society. We'll now hand over the time to Ms. Taukei for her remarks.
Thank you. The Director for the International Center for Law and Religious Studies, Mr. Brett Schaff, the Dean of Faculty of Business and Government, BYU Hawaii, Mr. Nate Stevens, fellow participants, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, Bola Vinaka, and good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the Fijian government and the Honorable Attorney General, it is a pleasure to be here to speak on this session on the different perspectives on human dignity in Fiji. Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. We've been discussing human dignity in the morning sessions, and I think for the purposes of this presentation, we're looking at Article 1 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 1 took a differing view. Are we good? Test. Okay. I might as well. I haven't had lunch. So Article 1 took a differing view and position on dignity from what was previously understood in being something that people earned because of their class, race, or other advantage. Under Article 1, simply human dignity is something all humans are born with, and all people deserve respect by simply being human. Similar to Article 1 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, human dignity is enshrined in the preamble of the Fijian Constitution, which states, "We, the people of Fiji, commit ourselves to the recognition and protection of human rights and respect for human dignity." We can also see that in Section 1E of the Constitution in terms of the founding values. The Republic of Fiji is a sovereign democratic state founded on the values of human dignity, respect for the individual, personal integrity and responsibility, civic involvement, and mutual support. It further is present in Section 3 in terms of the interpretation of the Constitution, and as well as Section 7. Section 7 of the Constitution is in relation to the interpretation of the Constitution, whereby the court, tribunal, or other authority must take into account and promote the values that underlies a democratic society, which is based on human dignity and freedom. So really, in essence, when you talk about human dignity, it really is, it really demands the protection of human rights. So a glance at the human rights situation in Fiji. Fiji is fully committed to advancing and protecting the fundamental principles and values of human rights enunciated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, while at the same time cultivating an ethos of a responsible human rights culture. We have shown global leadership in terms of human rights. In summation, really, we have been the first Pacific Island developing states to become a member of the Human Rights Council in 2019. Thereafter, we were appointed as the Vice President of the Human Rights Council and subsequently as President of the Human Rights Council in 2021. We are also the first Pacific Island country in the Pacific and the Oceanic region to ratify all core 9 human rights treaties and conventions as of August 2019. Since we ratified UNCAT in 2016, we joined the Convention Against Torture, or CTI initiative, a core group of countries working towards the universal ratification of UNCAT. We've also worked closely with the core group in the Human Rights Council to encourage other states to abolish laws pertaining to capital punishment and to support a moratorium against the use of reintroduction of the death penalty. In Fiji's case, we had removed the death penalty from our criminal procedure code, and ultimately in 2015 we had removed the death penalty from our martial laws. So that was the only place that was pending for Fiji, and we've done that in 2015. We've also ratified other treaties such as the UN Convention on Transnational Crime and its 3 protocols, and chaired the UNODC Working Group on Trafficking in Persons in 2019. Also, in terms of our work to strengthen human rights work in Fiji, we have a standing invitation to UN Special Rapporteurs or UN independent experts. This is so for the UN independent experts or rapporteurs to come to Fiji and assess our situation in specific areas. So since 2015, we've had the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to education. And then in 2016, we had the Special Rapporteur on all contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, and related forms of intolerance. In 2017, we had the independent expert on environment of human rights by persons with albinism. 2018, we had the Special Rapporteur on environment, and in 2019, we had the Special Rapporteur on the rights to health. What this does is, at the end of their visit, they would write a report which is tabled at the Human Rights Council, and of course they have recommendations for Fiji in the areas that we need to improve on and take into consideration in as far as we discuss national planning and national development plans at national level. As discussed earlier, we are the first in the Pacific to have ratified the Core 9 Human Rights Conventions. The journey started in 2010. At the time, when we went for our UPR in Geneva, we had made a commitment to have ratified the remaining human rights conventions and treaties. At the time, we had, in 2010, we had only ratified 3 conventions, as you can see from the list. This is on racial discrimination, the rights of the child, and the rights, elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. We went back in 2014 for our UPR second cycle. We reaffirmed our commitment, and at the time we had our constitution, our 2013 constitution, which made it very easy for Fiji to ratify the conventions because these international norms have been embedded or reflected in our constitution, particularly our Bill of Rights chapter. So since 2016, we then ratified the remainder of the conventions, and as of 2019, August 2019, we had ratified all the Core 9 Human Rights Conventions. In terms of our national laws, as I just mentioned, we have a robust Bill of Rights, which again made it very easy for us to ratify the remaining human rights treaties and conventions. I won't go through the detailed rights and freedoms that are listed under our Bill of Rights, but really to say, I think we had the right to housing. These are socio-economic rights and civil and political rights that we have in our 2013 Constitution for the first time. How do you translate that into national laws? While we have existing laws that are in line with our human rights, with our international obligations, we have also developed some of the legislations to make sure that you have a standalone legislation to implement your obligations under those specific treaties and conventions. So some of these national laws are listed here. The Domestic Violence Act, the Crimes Act, the Child Welfare Act, which is in relation to the Civil Conventions on the Rights of the Child, Tertiary Scholarship and Loans Act, and this goes to the point of, this goes to the initiative for free education in Fiji, which began around the same time. The Republic of the Military Forces Amendment Act, this is removing the death penalty, and the rights of persons with disability following our ratification on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Convention. Online Safety Commission and the Climate Reallocation of Community Trust Fund. And this is in relation to, for example, the reallocation of communities due to climate change, reallocation of displaced persons due to climate change. This is, again, I think giving an example in terms of the Convention Against Torture and the legislations that reflects those provisions under UNCAT. So we have the Section 11 of our Constitution, which talks about the freedom to be safeguarded against torture and cruel and degrading treatment. Then we also have Section 87 of our Crimes Act, which sets out torture as an offense. And then you have the Section 24 of the Immigration Act and again Extradition Act 2003. So the point being is we're trying to develop legislation that aligns with our international obligations under the various human rights treaties and conventions. Implementation of human rights conventions. I will not speak at length. I think I'll give it to my colleague to expand on this, but more so in terms of the Human Rights Commission, they have an expanded mandate under our Constitution to receive complaints, investigate, and institute proceedings if there's any violation of any constitutional rights. Constitutional redress, which has a provision under the Constitution, is essentially seeking redress from the court if there is a violation of your constitutional right. And working at the AG's office, we have defended cases of constitutional redress, which are instituted. Some of them are instituted directly from the Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission. Access to justice, we have the Legal Aid Commission in Fiji that provides legal services to those that cannot afford the services of a private lawyer. There is a threshold. If you're earning below 30,000 collectively, you can apply for legal assistance. We have the first out procedure, and these are, I'm highlighting only some forms of the ways that we are implementing or giving, implementing our obligations under these various conventions and treaties. First out procedure, as well as the no-drop policy. This is specifically in relation to gender-based violence cases. Before, we used to have a reconciliation method where parties can reconciliate and the matter does not proceed to court. But we have this no-drop policy that even at the moment it is reported, it goes directly to, it takes the normal course up until to court. All of that said, what are some of the challenges? Implementation is still a challenge. While we have a very robust legal framework in place, there is a gap between government and the people at the grassroots level. And again, I think I'll leave it to my colleague to expand on that, because while we have all of this legislation in place, I think you can see the effect of it if it's effective on the ground. Financial resources, financial and resource constraints. We share similar challenges with our Pacific Island brothers and sisters. As a developing country, this becomes an issue, an ongoing issue, and will continue to be an issue by virtue of us being a developing country. Staff turnover, lack of coordination with the government ministries in terms of implementation, and also impacts of other social issues such as climate change. So when we have natural disasters, and we are prone to that, our finances and our resources are diverted. So your implementation you have to put that on hold so that you can cater for the needs when climate change and natural disasters occur. Some of the way forward, I think to continue to strengthen our human rights work, awareness programs is necessary. The human rights, the HRADC has done work in that area. Human rights trainings, these are recommendations from when we go for UPR. Some of the recommendations include the capacity building of our, for example, the Fiji Police Force, corrections officers, even the judiciary, to be able to understand what human rights is all about while they, in their various work. Working with our development partners in terms of capacity building workshops, also collaborating with community leaders, religious leaders, because these are influential people in the community. Better coordination with government ministries and department, again, as I said, because respect for human dignity demands the protection of human rights, so it's essential for us to continue to raise awareness and making sure that the key people in our community are well educated and to understand what human rights is all about. From a cultural perspective, I won't touch on this, but one of the things that I would note is, I think it was discussed in the earlier sessions, is the spirit of community. We live in because of where we live in this part of the world, I think it's our communal way of living is very much common within Pacific states, and I think it's a concept of love your neighbor as yourself and looking at each other, looking after each other. So I think it's very common, not only in Fiji, but I think it's also in other Pacific Island countries. It's the way that you sort of afford human dignity to people. I think for us, this one of the terms that I've got here on the slide is vakarokoroko and vendokai. It means respect and showing respect to the people that are senior than you, for the most part. Thank you. I'm really trying to stay within time, but on that note, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for this opportunity and for the volunteers that are here to assist us. Thank you again. I can take questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Taukei. We'll now hand over time to Dr. Khan for her part of the panel.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Fantastic, thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the organizers, the participants, the panelists, and our esteemed moderator. I'll start on the same topic, but I'll take a different stance a little bit. My approach would be just looking at overview of Fiji in the context of like ethnicity and the breakdown of some stats, very broad stats. And then I will focus on, I think there's a lot talked about human dignity concept itself, so I'll skip that slide. And I'll focus on the Indo-Fijians and their concept of dignity. So just an overview, we've got a population of less than 1 million. It's around 930-something thousand. It hasn't increased much. It just increases by almost 1% or something because we have a strong out-migration as well. I think something like 14,500 people moved out of Fiji in the first 3 months of this year alone. So it's going to be an issue in future as well. And we are unique in the Pacific in the sense that we've got a different ethnic makeup. So majority of the Pacific is quite homogeneous. They do have the tribal differences, but Fiji is unique in the sense we've got a large population of Indo-Fijians. So of that 900,000 plus, we've got about 35% Indo-Fijians who look like me, and I think Reverend James Bhagwan, and also Archbishop as well, because he's from a part Chinese background. So we are a mixed bag, and when I saw coming in Hawaii, I said, oh, this is also very interesting, because Hawaii has got somewhat similar. You see a lot of mixed race ethnic people, so it's very interesting in that sense. So indigenous population at the moment, we had issues in the last census where they were not allowed to reveal by ethnicity, so we don't have that kind of specific figure, but around 60% of our population is indigenous Fijians. 35% make up as Indo-Fijians, and 1.2% are Rotumans, and others, the rest of them are others who are other Pacific Islanders, Chinese, Pachirippans, and so on. So a little bit of context of the Indo-Fijians, how they arrived in Fiji. So in 1897 from 1897 to 1916, more than 60,000 Indians were brought over from India by ship to work as indentured laborers. And majority of them never left because they were allowed to stay back after 10 years, and but through that period, and again, these Indo-Fijians make up in religion denomination, we have 35% of the Indo-Fijians, of that 35%, 7% of the national population, 7% are Muslims, and about 30% are Hindus. So again, we have a multicultural and multi-religious society. And they've retained that through the indigenous period and afterwards, and they've also very strongly retained their culture as well. When I was doing my Ph.D. data collection, and I said, why are we having this ethnic tension? And one of the respondents said, two very strong cultures. The Taukei, the indigenous Fijians, have also very strong culture, and Indo-Fijians in Fiji particularly have retained very strongly. In Suriname and Gunaya, they have not retained that strong connection to the traditional culture. So Fiji is unique in some sense in that way. Just going back to human dignity, let me hope it's showing. So I'm not going to touch on anything apart from just reminding that human beings are born free and equal, and that dignity aspect comes from that. And again, Article 1, as she's talked about, and I think in morning he talked about it as well. So human rights naturally spring from that dignity. And I like the word dignity because I think in Pacific, we are sort of very wary of the concept, word human rights. Immediately you talk about human rights, they say, no, this is we are communal based, we don't do human rights as individual, and that doesn't work here, this is not Pacific, this is a Western value. So part of my job as an academic to talk about and convince people that no, culture is very much embedded in UDHR. So if you look at Article 27, it talks about that you are allowed to practice your culture. It's part of that, it is not something separate. And then again, we go back to some of the scriptures and how human rights is embedded in that, how cultures are embedded in human rights. So it may be a new terminology, but it's reinventing what was already in the culture, and it's just taking out some problematic parts. So, something that was it's abusive or torture then would be taken out. Maybe it was accepted in the past, but no longer accepted now. So coming back to the concept of Indo-Fijians in Fiji, focusing on that, and I'm not going to, because I think Suliana and Kini are both going to focus on the legal aspect. But I am involved in a research at the moment which is ongoing. In fact, I have to go back and complete the rest of the data collection. There's 3 of us from USP who are doing a research on Muslims and belonging, the concept of belonging in Fiji. And it's a really interesting research because it's talking about some of the questions we've explored is what are the shared value as a Muslim you have with the rest of Fiji population. And we find that a lot of times people have come back and said, yes, the community. We're still very strong communal base, even for the Indo-Fijians as well. You're still very connected to your extended family, your wider network, your neighbors. You still, even if their neighbors are not Indo-Fijians and not even your relatives, you still have a very strong connection on that. Secondly, the spirituality. Pacific itself is very strong on their own faith. In Fiji, is similar. Very strong Indo-Fijians as well are very strong in their different faiths. So you'll have, we have holidays for Easter and Christmas. This is national holidays. We also have holiday for Diwali, and we also have holiday for Prophet Muhammad's Day. And also be negotiating whether we can have, instead of Prophet Muhammad's Day, we can move it to Eid, in fact, because that is much more wider celebration for that. And again, during those times, we visit each other's home. I had Eid celebration party open house last Sunday at my home, and many people came that were non-Muslims, and that is very much part of our life, that it's not only, and for Christmas when it's break holiday, most of Indo-Fijians I know, they get together with their family. They may not do the spiritual aspect as a Christian they do, but we do get together as family. So community is really important in that aspect. Some of the other shared values was going back to some of the basics. It's like the culture, the respect for the elders, the way of eating, the way of, if somebody is passing your home and you having a meal, there is no hesitation to invite that person in. That's very, very common. And that is much more common in the rural area, but now with urban centers where we have gated homes, it's a little bit difficult because we've gated and imprisoned ourselves inside in the yard, so that's much more difficult. But in the rural homes where it's much more relaxed and the environment is much more open, that still happens. Number 2 was safety and security, and this continues to be an issue in the Pacific in some sense of there's a lot of burglary that happens. In the past, I'm talking about less than 10 years ago, the victims were usually Indo-Fijians. The break-ins used to happen to their homes. And this was, of course, not state-sponsored or something. It was just the issue of people who were perpetrators who were breaking in. And we still have that issue, but I find that talking to my colleagues as well who are indigenous Fijian, that it is happening to them now as well. So it could be issue of escalating poverty, so people are feeling the brunt of it and taking advantage of that. Number 3 is the ability to practice our religion and with dignity, and this is a really interesting one. Fiji has got a constitution, we've got a constitutional right on that, and we are very blessed that we have, as a Muslim, we have very little discrimination from the law itself, because the law provides for us to practice. Law provides for me to, if I want to wear my hijab, I can wear that at work. In fact, I was the first professional working woman who was starting to wear hijab at workplace, and I was working at UN at that time, and I've never had, and I've changed a lot of jobs because I've worked on project-based in the past mostly, and I've never encountered any discrimination based on that. But having said that, there have been women in lower economic strata who've come across some discrimination. I think lately, Suliana, Kini and I were talking about a case that happened about 3 months ago where a woman had gone to do internship in a hospital, and she was told by the matron who was in charge that, no, you have to go home and remove that and then come back to work. She came to me and she said, what do I do? I said, you have to take this case up. And this is the 5th or 6th case I've come across. Majority of them, when I refer them to go further, they've hesitated. And as a minority, I understand the hesitation because they didn't want to ruffle feathers as well. This woman said she was very eager to go ahead, and she did, and the permanent secretary said there is no place for that kind of discrimination at our workplace, and rightly so. And there was apologies sent, and she was sent back to work, and she's now doing her internship there. While we were just coming through, I said to Kini, I'm going to go down to the prayer room downstairs at the airport. We've got a fantastic prayer room. It's got the Bible and the Quran side by side. So very accommodating of all faiths. The government has got a fantastic Bill of Rights, and like Suliana has said, and it has got a very good Bill of Rights in that it covers a lot of aspects of human rights. However, saying so, all of those Bill of Rights has clawback clauses. All of those rights says, based on national security, blah, blah, blah can happen. So in the past government, using that clause as national security, we were not allowed to go into many of the protests or march. I was thinking, hopeful that this government would be different, but we're finding it's not as different, because when the Palestine issue came up, some of my students were organizing a peaceful march across the city, and they were declined based on national security. So again, that is bantered, and what is national security? Is it going to escalate into violence? It's very confusing because it can be a very abstract term for people who are working on the ground. Number 5, we look at sort of how other communities treat us, and again, with the perception is the issue usually is not at the community level, it's more politics. And again, it's not the government level itself, but it's more politics. And whoever's in political power and how they're swayed by issues sometimes. Having said that, there are some discrimination that happens, but I find that in day-to-day life, that is very minor issues, and it's only individualistic, just like that issue of a matron turning down a woman, not allowing her to participate at work. One of the problem areas, though, is majority of the Muslims we talked about in this research, they refuse to engage in social issues. So very little engagement. So if you want to ask the Muslim community to come and be part of the march, for example, Fiji Women's Crisis Center has good vigil for Gaza issue, genocide in Gaza. Every Thursday, a handful of Muslims would only come. There's that awareness that we are a minority, we may not have that fear is really embedded in them. I don't know whether that fear is still from 1987 when the coup happened. That is something that we are still exploring through our research, why that fear is so embedded and why people are so hesitant to vocalize or to even on social media to say that we are concerned about this social issue, because that fear is so embedded in them. Some of the other issues in the broader concept is gender-based violence continues to be a problem. Like no-drop policy is there, but in practice the application is very weak. Land security is an issue. There's a huge population of informal settlements in Fiji. And climate change is also an issue that I think some of them you've already talked about. Political instability, because sometimes every time there's a major concern, there's sort of that word banded around that we'll have another coup. High rates of unemployment and lack of understanding of rights versus responsibilities. There's concerns by parents, they say, we don't want to encourage child rights because we don't have any control over our children. We don't want to have corporal punishment banned in Fiji because we are afraid our children will become very indisciplined. And that is lack of understanding on that. Lastly, I just want to cover on what can happen in future. The way forward would be government already has a good constitution, but more awareness needs to be done on that, more training, and more training of civil service as well as other people on the ground, particularly the front officers who are working. Sometimes they lack really basic understanding of human rights issues. Working collaboratively with NGOs, government, and faith-based organizations, but also in that, if you're working with donor agencies, just to be cautious. Sometimes the issues are very donor-driven, and there needs to be a caution on that, whether we really need this issue to be done at this time, or is it just because it's donors that have got the funding and they want to work on that issue. And open discussions about awareness of rights and responsibilities, and sort of more awareness and training on the concepts of rights itself. Very open discussion, whether that's part of our culture and how that's part of our culture or not, and ownership of it. Thank you very much. I hope I'm within time.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, for your remarks. We'll now hand over time to Loukinikini, Lewaravu, for our remarks.
The International Center for Law and Religion Studies Academic Advisory Board of BYU Hawaii, the Oceanian Perspectives on Human Dignity Conference Organizing Committee, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, aloha and misa pulavinaka. Thank you. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to first extend my appreciation to the International Center for Law and Religion Studies Academic Advisory Board of BYU Hawaii for the invitation to be part of this significant conference. It is truly an honor and privilege to be one of the speakers amongst a high caliber of speakers for this conference. Vinaka Vakalevu. This is my daughter, so I've put her on the screen on purpose, and you'll see as I go along with my presentation of why I've decided to put her on my presentation. We have heard from wonderful speakers this morning. The religion session really set the scene, and then coming on to our other colleagues from the Pacific. You've heard from my colleagues previously, and I feel like they've already also set the scene and the platform with the background and law. So because of time constraints, I strategically chosen two specific but broad examples to illustrate how human dignity is observed and preserved in Fiji. This is done on purpose because one, I'm speaking from my background of work experience, which is human rights, and two, as I've said, my colleagues previously have talked about other examples that do relate to this issue in Fiji, and that includes the religion session that was held this morning. So this is basically the outline of my presentation, speaking on my examples, looking at challenges, and then seeing how we can overcome these challenges. My colleague from the Attorney General has highlighted pretty much almost all of the legal aspects of this. But the first example that I wanted to talk about is human dignity is preserved and protected through a robust human rights legal framework. And you have already heard my two colleagues have talked about how well and how robust the human rights legal framework is in Fiji. There is about 5 times the word human dignity is noted in the Constitution. This is the current Constitution. And there's about 7 times that the word dignity is also mentioned in there. But I only want to draw your attention to this 4 references of human dignity, which I thought was impressive. And as it may be also that the Fiji Constitution has such a comprehensive recognition of human dignity in its Constitution. The references can be viewed as a strong dedication by Fiji to ensure that human dignity is recognized, respected, and promoted. In addition to this, all 4 constitutions, so the 2013, the current one, this is the 4th constitution for Fiji, has incorporated and guaranteed the protection of a list of specific human rights. The list of human rights in the first constitution was built on over the years. There are currently 34 human rights that are guaranteed in Fiji's current constitution, compared to 13 in the first constitution. Included in these additional human rights are the specific protection and promotion of the rights of some of the most vulnerable groups in Fiji, including children, the rights of women, the rights of persons with disability, and our rainbow community. The inclusion of the specific protection of these vulnerable groups demands that every person with a disability has the right to participate in society, to be respected, and to benefit in the same way as people without disability. It demands that our children are human beings and that they too deserve the protection and promotion of their human dignity. It demands that there should be no discrimination based on the grounds of, and this is specifically expressed in the Constitution, the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Now, from the Constitution recognizing the Bill of Rights, Fiji then went on to strengthen its commitments to promote and protect the human dignity of all Fijians by ratifying all 9 core human rights treaties. As my colleague had alluded to, Fiji is the first and possibly the only Pacific Island country to have ratified all 9 core human rights treaties. Now, it's one thing to ratify, and in Fiji's context, you would have to domesticate these human rights treaties. Efforts soon followed after ratification to try and domesticate these treaties. Specific examples of legislations that I would like to speak on includes the rights of persons with disability, the Family Law Act, and the Corrections Services Act 2006. The Disability Act and its related policies aims to ensure a more inclusive Fiji that demonstrates respect for all people and allow them to participate fully and equally in society. The Correction Services Act 2006 encourages the correction services to consider international standards for the treatment of prisoners, that's the Mandela Rules, as guiding principles to adopt when carrying out functions under that act. The rules are based on an obligation to treat all prisoners with respect for their inherent dignity and value as human beings, and to prohibit any form of torture and other forms of ill treatment. Another key milestone that the Attorney General has spoken to that took place very soon after independence was upholding and respecting the right to life as protected under the Constitution by abolishing the death penalty and making life imprisonment the only punishment for murder in 1975. In 2015, the death penalty was abolished for all crimes. The last execution was carried out before independence in 1964. Sometimes signing up to international treaties and having national policies in place alone may not be enough to safeguard against breaches of a person's human dignity. In the 1997 Constitution, Fiji decided to establish a national human rights institution to protect and promote human rights in Fiji. In 1999, the Human Rights Commission was established. A national human rights institution is an independent body established by either the Constitution or a legislation with a very broad human rights mandate to promote and protect human rights at the national level. There are currently 4 active national human rights institutions in the Pacific: Fiji, Samoa, Australia, and New Zealand. The Commission, the Fiji Human Rights Commission, conducts human rights awareness and education, receives and investigates human rights alleged violations and complaints, seeks constitutional redress from court should there be any human rights violations and should there be no conciliation or mediation that takes place internally, advise the government on human rights compliance. Human rights, the type of human rights that the Commission addresses encompasses not only the Bill of Rights, but all the rights that are enshrined in all the 9 core human rights treaties that Fiji has ratified. Over the years, the Commission has carried out a lot of awareness in community, schools, and various stakeholders to raise awareness and build the capacity of the community about human rights and the responsibility that comes with respecting other people and their human rights. Complaints received over the years included alleged breaches of human rights, ranging from abuse and torture by law enforcement officers, discrimination, rights of persons with rights of children, and rights of persons with disability. The Commission investigates and makes appropriate recommendation on addressing the violation, which in turn returns dignity to the victims. Aside from the Commission, there's also different work carried out by the government, NGOs, CSOs, churches, communities, and individuals to ensure the promotion of human dignity in Fiji. Many policies and programs have been developed and are ongoing. Different groups and organizations coming together to address pressing human rights violations and ensure an inclusive Fiji. Overall, I guess you can say that Fiji's human rights protection legal framework journey has gone from strength to strength by ensuring certain laws were put in place and some were abolished to keep human dignity intact. One cannot have dignity without rights to protect them. Now, the second example that I wanted to also share views on is human dignity is preserved and protected through culture. My previous colleague have shared experiences from the Indo-Fijian context. The examples that I'm going to share will be specifically from the Taukei or indigenous Fijian culture. If you say or talk about human rights or human dignity in the community setting or at the grassroots level, the majority may not understand it because the majority may not understand its true meaning and application, or may say that it is a foreign concept and it has no place in our culture or in our country. However, when you look closely at our culture and everyday living, human dignity and principles of human rights are deeply embedded in our culture. So from the Taukei or the indigenous Fijian perspective, we have our traditional values, cultural values that already embed human rights. So we have respect, mutual respect, vei waka roko roko taki. You have love, vei lomani, care, caring for each other, vei tau wai taki. Our actions and how we treat each other, mutual respect of one another, when they say too low or excuse when you walk past or over someone, or the tone of our voice when we ask or answer, or how we care for our elderly, or caring for our children, or caring for our women. I would like to quickly share 3 specific examples from the Taukei culture, which sheds values on the person and specific groups, such as women, which is why I put my daughter there, because there's such high value that the Fijian culture places on women. First is the holistic value or respect of a person. In the indigenous context, there is a holistic value in a person. They represent not just himself or herself, but his family, tribe, clan, household, and land. This is seen in how a person or persons introduces or addresses each other. In the Western context, one would introduce the first name basis and where you are from, country, village, or your work status. In the indigenous context, you're not only introducing, but you are also announcing yourself, your name and where you are from, introducing your father's side first, village, province, your household, clan, tribe, then your mother's side, again, your village, province, house, clan, tribe. There's a notion of respect in the introduction itself because you are not addressing the single person, but the holistic or the collective background of that person. When you introduce yourself this way, you will find that you are also identifying your connection or relationship with the other person. And that will also determine how you will address and approach or care for the other person or family or community. The second example is our women, our mothers. They are called the giver of life. The women are known in the indigenous culture as the giver of life. For giving birth and the beginning of one's first breaths of life is the result of how a woman's body provides the perfect platform for the creation of life. The paternal side is always grateful to the maternal side because without them, there wouldn't be any life or continuation of the lineage or family. This acknowledgement and respect continues till the person leaves the temporary world. In some Mitilevu tribes, when the person dies, there is a custom and symbolic of the returning of a deceased breath of life to the maternal's clan, or vasu. The deceased family would give all the best mats, tapa, food, the biggest whale tooth, tambua, from the funeral gathering to the representative of the deceased maternal kin with words of appreciation for bringing the life to the deceased, for nurturing and feeding and bringing up of the deceased. With his or her departure, they close the gift of life that's been bestowed. The third example is the sacredness of the head, ulu, or the sacredness of the maternal head. The head or ulu is very sacred in indigenous Fijian culture. It is rude to touch one's head. You would have to ask for permission and say too low, should you wish to touch one's hair. Our forefathers have told us that not only is the head sacred, it is a constant reminder of one's symbolic link to one's life giver, and that's the mother, for the sacred gift of bringing and beginning of one's breath of life. The head, or the person, is in existence because of the life giver, and the only people that can touch one's head without permission are the family or clan of the life giver. There are many examples, but these are some of the key ones that I wanted to share. The last two examples demonstrate how much value the indigenous culture places on mothers and women, their sacredness, and how that extends to the mother's kin. Now, moving on to the challenges. Okay, I'm quickly going to wrap up. The first challenge is understanding and the application of human rights. While Fiji has a beautiful human rights legal framework, only the policymakers tend to understand these technical treaties, laws, and policies. There's a big gap in the level of understanding at the grassroots level, the community, of the technicalities of what these treaties and legislation mean and their appropriate application. Further, they think there are no limitations to the application of their rights. There is confusion, misinterpretation, and then leads to misapplication of human rights. Individuals forget that exercising of their human rights comes with responsibilities, that you need to respect the other person's human rights. The second challenge is keeping up with domesticating and complying with many human rights treaties. While it is great to ratify all human rights treaties, the challenge is to ensure they are domesticated, especially if the country's system requires the domestication of human rights treaties. As a small island state, we don't have enough resources to implement. For example, Fiji has ratified the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disability and domesticated the treaty, but is struggling with implementation because it is costly to ensure accessibility, for instance, with infrastructure. The third challenge is implementing laws and policies, putting them into action. Sometimes we may have great national laws, but lack of implementation, but there's lack of implementation or are not implemented effectively. And lastly, the lack of resources and a commitment by everyone, so not just at the government level, but NGOs, CSOs, and from the community to make the relevant change. This means that if there is no commitment to make this relevant change, then there's no sustainability of the ongoing programs or activities for the promotion of human rights. How can we overcome these challenges? First is the need to contextualize, using our religious values and traditional knowledge. The community is confused and lacks understanding of the application and true meaning of human rights and human dignity because of the technical terminologies and concepts used. Even if these terms are translated into the vernacular language, it still does not capture the essence of the value of human rights or human dignity. So there is a need to have an informal sit-down talanoa with the community to unpack. When unpacking, the community understands better or best or can relate more to the concept and principles of human rights and human dignity when they are explained through culture, traditions, and through your religious values. There is a need to speak in their language, meaning not only in the vernacular, but also demonstrating the already embedded human rights and human dignity values in culture values or religion values. For instance, the examples that I've said earlier, we can see how much value or culture our society places on women and our mothers, but yet, in this day of time, we still see violence left, right, and center against women and our mothers. According to a Fijian cultural consultant, Simeone Seru Dredre, it is in the past that values, ethics, ways of doing, and ways of being have been established as precedents. One does not know what the future holds, but the lessons but the lessons with established values and precedents in the past that have been passed from generation to generation as traditional knowledge, when acknowledged, foregrounded, and respected, the future will then take care of itself. This is a sustainable way of ensuring our Pacific communities continue to respect and promote human dignity. There's 3 others there, but I'd just like to mention here the collective or village approach. A common saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to do everything and anything. Each organization or institution has its expertise in different areas, but sometimes prefers to work in silos. Yet, if you dig deeper, we are all working towards addressing the same issue, the promotion and protection of our human rights. Coming together with a government, NGO, CSO, Human Rights Commission, churches, traditional leaders, schools, etc., can contribute to stronger and more consistent message delivery. And I think I'll end there because my stop sign has been raised like a few minutes ago, but overall that covers pretty much what I wanted to talk about. So happy to take questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you again, Kini, for your address, and also thank you to the distinguished panelists for Vinakwakaleu and Shukran to you for sharing your areas of expertise and the knowledge base, especially in your presentations where you highlighted not only the challenges but the ways forward that we could address these human dignity and human rights issues in Fiji. In the spirit of Whakaroko and Taukei, respect and honor, I think we've heard enough of me talking. We're going to open the floor a little for a couple of questions. And so please, if you have questions, we have a mic set up that you can ask our panelists on what comes to mind. So okay, we'll have time for a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 questions before, because of time, we'll roll in directly into our Cook Islands session. So please, if you have a question for our Fiji panelists, there's the mic prepared and ready for you.
I was really interested in your identification of the gap between the legal framework and the actual implementation. And I was wondering if you could speak more to that, about how it is that you are going about addressing that gap through training, and what sort of civil society organizations you're bringing in to help address that training gap. Because I think it's really wonderful to see the implementation be successful of such an elaborate legal framework that you've implemented. So if you could speak to that again, that'd be great.
Thank you for the question. I think I'll start off, and our colleagues will contribute to it. But yes, as mentioned in the presentation, and I think we all have a part to it. We have a robust legal framework, but the implementation, meaning that, like, how do you measure if it's working or not? For us, it's at the national level, and perhaps in our work, we know that there are effective policies in place. But then you also have your sort of partners, and you're talking about faith-based organizations, community leaders, other CSOs and NGOs who actually do the work on the ground in terms of in terms of the programs to give life to the implementation of those human rights conventions and treaties. How do we measure? It really is when you have something like, for example, if you're preparing a report, a state report for your review, universal periodic review, because that sort of takes stocks of your human rights situation for every 4 years. We have a different report as a state, and then you have a different report from the Human Rights Commission as well as the CSOs. They do have their own reports. You'll see the gaps. We have some programs that we have implemented, and you think that that's sort of addressing the issues, but then you also have the facts and cases and statistics from these shadow reports that tells you something else. So I think going forward, really, to address that, you have to work with the development partners, let the politics aside, but more so work on how can you better address this situation on the ground. So I think it's definitely working. Continue to work with your partners. because these are the people that sort of goes down to the grassroots level and talk about the issues on human rights and the programs that are in place that they can utilize in the spirit of, you know, sort of, you know,
Okay.
yeah, it's sort of like you're giving rise, you're sort of giving life to your obligations. You're complying with your obligations. So it's talking about those programs with the people at the grassroots level to make sure that they understand what the concepts are and what are the programs that you can access that is available from the government standpoint. Yeah.
Anybody want to add to that?
Just quickly, one of the ways, some of the ways that I'm an academic, but I work very, very closely with NGOs, and I also work very closely with OHCHR. This is the UN Commission of Human Rights in Fiji, based in Fiji. So one of the things that OHCHR has done in last year with the 75th anniversary of the UDHR is they translated the UDHR in Taukei language. They've also translated in Bislama for Vanuatu people, and for Pidgin in Solomon Islands. And that's the first time that these languages have been used for UDHR. So if anyone in the room or anyone wider wants to have copies, I've got e-copies of it, I can email and you can use that in your own communities to promote sort of universal human rights principles. And again, something very practical on the no-drop policy. I know that's a very problematic area. I'm supervising a master's students on that issue. And we come across so many issues where women have reported and said, you know, we went to the police, but rather than implementing, so DVR or whatever is supposed to be happening, they've started to counsel us and, you know, you reconcile because that's better for your family and so on and so forth. So what we have done, we've collaborated with OACHR, and also on standalone, we have conducted trainings with police officers. I have talked to the commissioner myself and to the training department, and there's a huge need for Fiji police to go and expand their training. At the moment, they have a 3 or 4 months training, which is ridiculous when you think about it, that these guys would be implementing the legislations on ground. And in 3 months, can you think about lawyers going through 4-year training, and then you have police officers with 3 months training. And that's why some of the problematic areas is when these new police officers, who are the front desk officers most of the time, they don't have understanding of these basic principles. And that's where the problem is. So the trainings, usually the workshops, and then are attended by mid-level management, where they don't then filter it down right to the desk level, and that's where the importance is. So we've worked, we do hope that they will change the curriculum and they'll expand it to at least 1 year, 6 months, which I think Tonga has got that, 18 months for police training, so that there needs to be expanded to that. Another thing that we have come across is Save the Children Fiji has developed a really good manual on positive parenting. Ministry of Education actually has got also a very good manual on how to manage behavioral issues in school. Yet again, I'm supervising another master's student who's a 20-year experience of teaching in high school, was not aware of that policy. And he came to me with that mindset that he's going to prove through research that corporal punishment is not working in Fiji, that banning corporal punishment was not working in Fiji. So experienced teacher, he said it's problematic because children are not listening. And I said, did you use these behavioral issues that policy guides you? He said, I didn't know this existed. So somebody who's working, so there's a real gap between these two, and I don't know personally how that gap can be filtered, because some people are aware, but it's pockets who are aware, not throughout the community.
Thank you for that, Dr. Khan. We have one more question here from Archbishop Peter Chong. Your Grace.
Thank you. Not so much a question, but an affirmation of some things that Suliana.
Suliana. Yeah.
Mentioned about working on. Okay. Mentioned about contextualizing human dignity, especially human dignity, and then the question of human rights. And I like what you said about responsibility and how we use the language in the local scene, and And also, there needs to be, I'd like to, for the sake of others, I met a UN group, they went to Rotterdam. What are you going to do? We're going to talk about human rights. And on what? On domestic violence. Well, how about, so I talked to them about the importance of finding a common language. And if you could just unpack more about this, because this is very crucial, because if there is, when there's a gap in the language, then it has difficulty in getting down. And there are many cultural rituals that we have that, communicate this thing. But just speak more about on this, when you talk about contextualizing human dignity, what does it entail? Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is an issue not only in Fiji but across the Pacific. And the issue here is bringing the high-level discussions and all these technological terminologies from here to translate it to how the people in the community would understand it. They wouldn't understand the term human dignity or human rights. Even if you translate it into the Fijian vernacular, or Indian, or Samoan Tongan, it would still not capture the essence of what human rights is and human dignity. So the only approach is that you have to unpack it and talk about it in different faces. And what I have seen, what worked from when I was working in Samoa, and could also possibly work in Fiji, is the link. You draw the link between the human rights principles and values and the link with the cultural values that are similar. So, and in there, we showcase to the community that human rights has already been embedded into the culture. So it's nothing new, it's not a foreign concept. So like I mentioned about mutual respect and love, these are key principles of human rights. Protection and security is a similar that we have in our culture. So it's finding those linkage, those commonalities between the human rights principles and linking them with our culture. And not only that, but it's the way also that you humanize, having them see the different instances of their lives that they're going through and how that relates to that actually what you're doing now, taking your children to school, that is your right to education. So they don't see right to education as right to education unless you show them an example of what that is. Taking your child to school, taking them to the hospital when they are sick, not be subjected to abuse and violence to the point where they are, taken to the hospital or have passed on. So it's actually demonstrating this to them. So not only you're showing the linkages, but you're also giving them these examples of the everyday living, the cultural living, so that they can make that connection. And then they will say, okay, so now I see. This is what human dignity does mean. It's the vasu, it's mutual respect, it's me holistically as a person representing my family, my community, and so forth. So I hope that explains, answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kini, for your response there. Do you want to add to that?
Just to add, really, I think Kini had really summarized it well, but I think one of the things that we have as Pacific Islanders is the Talanoa approach, dialogue. And I think if you make it as informal as possible and sort of like contextualizing, as you said, but sort of using the terms that are commonly known to our people, as Kini said, and have that conversation as often as possible in your various community gatherings and religious gatherings. Have this sort of conversation where you're talking about it and what it actually means, because then it makes the work easier in terms of recognizing this is what it is, this is what human rights is all about, and how we can better our community in terms of, in relation to social issues and other controversial issues that we have within our communities. So I think it's Talanoa is very much part of how we can approach these issues. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. This brings us to the end of our session. We encourage you to continue having talanoa vevo sakianga in Taukei also conversations as we go out of this session. I thank you again to our distinguished panelists.